and welcome to today's Bright Ideas Coffee Hour program. This discussion is sponsored by the Intellectual Property Law section of the New York State Bar Association. We encourage you to unmute your audio, enable your cameras, jump in, and engage if you have a question or comment during the program. There will also be an opportunity to engage in the open discussion after the program. At this time, Bill Samuels, Intellectual Property Law Section Chair, will introduce our speaker. Bill?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to introduce Christine Ippolito, the founder and principal of Compass Workforce Solutions. She's an HR expert in a number of different areas, including compliance, talent acquisition, performance management, conflict resolution, risk mitigation, and just general operational controls. Today, she's going to be talking to us about why your clients need restrictive covenants and giving us some real life examples to allow the prevent employees from stealing people and data. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Christine. And before I do that, I do want to encourage everybody to feel free to participate, ask questions, and interact. So Christine, take it away.
Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you so much for inviting me here today. Sharman, are you going to put the slides back up, or do I need to do that?
You can put them back up.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I just need to find, where did they go? Oh, here we go. Okay. It's always easier when there's no one watching you, right? All right, so amazing. So when Bill asked me to present to this particular group, I was actually pretty intrigued and fascinated by it because I have a lot of experience on the HR side working inside of organizations that either do or do not have restrictive covenants. So I thought we would talk today about all the options beyond the non-compete. I think people tend to get stuck on believing that they need a non-compete. And as I'm sure you're all familiar with, that can get pretty tricky in New York State and hard to manage because not every level of employee, should be given a non-compete. So what I thought we would talk about today is additional provisions, why they're so powerful, how often they're overlooked, why they're essential to the protection of your client's business, and how I've seen them used or not used, and the good, the bad, and the ugly once you're actually in the field working alongside business owners and executives. So there's kind of 4 segments to today's presentation. We're going to start with myths. What are common misconceptions that business owners have or C-suite executives have about restrictive covenants? How do we go beyond the non-compete and really put some strong tools in place that we can leverage to protect company data, intellectual property, confidential processes and procedures, and also protect employees from stealing other employees? And some examples of how things go wrong, which I'm also really curious to hear from all of you. So there's some interactive sections that we're going to go through. And then kind of that winning combination of when attorneys partner with HR, what that looks like and how we add value to each other's processes in order to make sure that clients are fully leveraging the agreements that you so diligently create for them. So why does this matter? So the competitive advantage that companies have really comes down to people, processes, and data. And in this particular landscape, that is a critical challenge. That's how people generate revenue. So without strong agreements in place, they really run the risk of losing competitive advantages overnight. and it can take a long time to get data back. Um, if you lose a key employee, it can take a long time to replace that person and understand all the knowledge that walked out the door with them. So these are some of the key reasons why this is so significant. And I think sometimes what people forget is the smaller the business, the more damaging this can actually be. And the more dangerous it can be for them to be trying to compete in a market where they're not protecting themselves. So at this point in time, right, we're 2025, we're in September. I thought this was kind of the perfect venue to create an entire PowerPoint presentation in Gamma. So all of these images are generated by AI, which sort of begs the question, I don't even know who they belong to, right? Are they mine? Are they private? Are they public? I used my prompts to create them. So when we're in this type of a workforce where employees are leveraging AI, they're working remotely. Before you all jumped on, Bill and I were having a conversation about some of his interesting projects, and he mentioned a client where the employee is situated in Berlin, but the company is California based. So you have all this complexity. With remote work, employees could literally be taking data, saving it on sticks, migrating it to other sources. And unless you have fairly sophisticated monitoring tools in place, companies don't even know that this is happening. I'm often even surprised how often we encounter clients who allow employees to put company data on their personal cell phones, right? So Outlook has a great app that you can download all your email to your cell phone, but our company's putting measures in place to really make sure that that data is protected. And the landscape around non-competes, we hear all this chatter and conversation. New York State is a very tricky environment when it comes to non-competes. Florida just passed legislation that they're actually going to allow non-competes in their attempt to try to attract more businesses. So when you have multi-state employers, you've got all these different challenges. And so we need these critical tools. So, why am I even qualified to speak to you about this? And I'll just give you a little bit of background about me. Before I started Compass in 2009, I was the vice president of human resources at DeVry University, which was a for-profit educational institution that had all different types of programs, technology, medicine, nursing. So a lot of proprietary information, right? And we're constantly creating curriculum. We're constantly bringing in high-level faculty with PhDs and trying to protect that information. But I've also worked on the absolute flip side of that, where there's small tech startups with $50 million dollars in funding that are relying on a group of 15 employees to create the next great website or the next great piece of software. So, how do you protect that organization and the venture capital or the private equity funding that's been put in, because obviously you don't want to lose or reduce the significance of that investment. I'm also a business owner, so I have my own team of employees. I have a team of 10, a combination of 1099s and people that are W-2s. So fortunately, with my background and my experience at a Fortune 250, I've always implemented at-will agreements or restrictive covenants in my 1099 agreements. And there's been probably 3 occasions in the last 16 years where those agreements have protected myself, the rest of my employees, and I've also been able to push back on clients and say, you can't take my employee. You can't, my 1099 can't come and service you on their own. And we also have proprietary ways that we service our clients that belong to Compass. So I have a lot of experience working with attorneys, my attorney, general counsel at different clients, and then oftentimes partnering with whoever our clients' attorneys are when we're looking at implementing these types of agreements. I'm an HR professional. I'm inside of an LLC. We do not give legal advice. So we're on the other side where we're the ones that are implementing the process, the procedure to make sure that things are rolled out, and understanding with counsel, what does this agreement protect? How do we have to make sure that we're protecting the enforceability of it? And how do we implement agreements in an effective manner for the client? Okay, so I'm just going to move this a little bit because it's kind of covering some of my slide. There we go. So we're going to, just to recap, we're going to start with myths. And I really love to hear from all of you on people's perceptions that they have about different types of restrictive covenants or non-competes. What goes beyond the non-compete? What should be in place? And what are some real life examples of significant losses of data, money, revenue, employees when these things aren't in place? And then again, how do attorneys and HR partner together to protect the clients that we're both working so hard to serve? So what do business owners get wrong? So when I'm first meeting with clients, oftentimes they don't even understand that restrictive covenants are actually an option, particularly inside of an at-will employment agreement that sits just alongside an offer letter. They're not quite sure when it should go out. And they get kind of hyper focused on putting non-competes in order to protect their organization. And I've even seen clients who try to issue non-competes to cleaners, like people that are literally going into buildings and cleaning at night and on weekends at minimum wage, thinking that they're protecting the organization. I've had other clients, someone in the credit card processing area who had non-competes with her salespeople to the point that the attorney general came after her because they were not happy that she was implementing these agreements with employees and attempting to enforce them and preventing employees from being gainfully employed. So here's, kind of to recap, what people think restrictive covenant is really just a non-compete. They also often think that these agreements are so restrictive that they're not going to be able to enforce it in court, or that they're so complicated that the average employee at the 8th grade reading level is not going to understand it and is not going to sign off on it. And they also believe that maybe they're too small, that, the investment that they make in creating this agreement isn't going to generate that particular return for them. And that's definitely not the case. So when business owners have misconceptions, right, we know they're kind of living in a place where they have blind spots and they're blind to risk and they don't make good decisions. And I'm sure each of you has gotten the phone call after the fact when the damage is done and data is missing or other employees walked out with critical information. Now the client is having a panic attack, and what can I do? So that wake up call really oftentimes comes too late for them. Generally in my business, right? Nobody brings in HR when the sun is shining and everything is beautiful and people are holding hands and singing Kumbaya. So my tagline at cocktail parties, when people ask me what I do, is I make a living off of people who behave badly at work. And I'm sure many of you can tell similar stories that I can about these horrific events that happen to very nice people because they're not prepared. So Sometimes what we also see is clients that use documents that they got online or that were created by Chat GPT, right? I asked Chat to create me um, an agreement, and this is what it came up with. They they also are afraid of actually rolling out agreements. So they might have a really nice agreement that you've drafted for them and it's sitting in their desk drawer. They don't know how to implement it. They don't know how to communicate that agreement to employees. They don't know how to explain it, or companies that assume that loyalty and longevity from their employees means that everybody's honest and of the highest integrity, and that the employee even understands what does confidential data mean, because oftentimes they don't. And the other misstep that we see quite frequently is people relying on language in employee handbooks when the employee handbook does not survive the termination of the employment relationship. So those policies on confidentiality and company information only apply when the employee is actively employed. So there's again quite a few misconceptions around what should be in place, when, and why. So, how do we address this? Well, right, make sure that clients fully understand all the provisions available. Specifically, tailor the agreement to the risk of the business. So, some of our clients have students, some of them have customers, some of them have clients. When you list out what's confidential and what's considered intellectual property, it needs to be tailored. We also see again, if people are pulling things from the internet, that the jurisdiction clause is incorrect, right? Their main office might be in New York, but they've taken something from a friend or something they found online, and the jurisdiction is Pennsylvania or New Jersey or a place where they really don't want to go to enforce it, or it's just not as favorable to them. And they often have this preconceived notion that employees are going to perceive this as extremely punitive. Instead of being able to explain to employees, this is a safeguard for you as an ethical employee. It provides a sense of stability and security in the type of work that we do at this company, where we're dealing with a lot of knowledge-based informations and systems and confidential data. And quite frankly, most people have a lot of access at work to clients' first name, last name, address, email, phone number. If you're not taking steps to protect it, then the law is generally not as favorable that you believe that this is significant proprietary data or data that you've spent thousands and thousands of dollars to collect and obtain. So we want to take those steps. So one of the examples that I'll share with you today is we had a non-for-profit with really only 6 employees and an executive director that had been there for over 14 years. And they were really quite confident that when we first engaged with them, this person was like family, they were never going to leave. Well, that director got the deal of a lifetime, right? Offered another position at another company. A lot of this client's data was just on hard copy lists, like paper lists, registration forms, not a fancy CRM, not fancy gated systems. So that director and a key staff member walked out with the complete donor contact list and put the non-for-profit in a significant damage situation, right? So now when they're doing galas or events, or they're even trying to communicate to the group of people that they rely on to generate revenue beyond grants, they're embarrassed. They're having to confirm people's information. They're having to share what happened. And they lost thousands and thousands of dollars in contributions. And in this day and age, it's a little bit hard to go to a donor that maybe has given you $5,000 or $10,000 and tell them that you don't have any systems in place to protect their confidential information, which, right? They're identifying information, their name, their address, their phone number, their email, all these pieces of information that are collected together. So it took them quite a while to recover, and fortunately now they've implemented some of these basic provisions, but really could have prevented that. So I'm going to give you a moment here to kind of think about a time that you've worked with a client that assured you over and over, this is my best business partner. We're like family. We're never going to hurt each other. I do business on a handshake. That's the way I've always done business. I don't need any agreements in place. And then, sure enough, the tables turn and there's a significant loss um, of data or a breach in that relationship, and that client suffered something significant. So if you wouldn't mind turning on your camera and maybe unmuting yourself, what kind of things do you see? What kind of pushback do you get from clients when you suggest to them that they should be putting in restrictive covenants or at-will agreements?
I'll just jump in real quickly. I mean, I don't know about others, but the first thing is, you know, is this really worth spending money on? Question comes up because, you know, we went to kindergarten together,
Mhm.
or our kids play soccer together, and insert, you know, complete confidence in the relationship. Um, but we explained that those are exactly the situations that putting agreements in place protect to preserve.
Yeah, I think some of the most brutal disputes that we've witnessed are actually oftentimes even between family members. So we have a client right now. The father started the business many, many years ago, very successful guy. He's in his mid 70s. He would love to step away, and his two children battle battle, like to the point that it's disruptive. It's a son and a daughter. Between them, uh, and they run different parts of the business, but you watch people and it's just brutal. Or we have another client where him and his partner, they have a big rental company, and they rent different types of things to movie studios, or like Netflix that's streaming, or Saturday Night Live, right, for set design and props. They used to be in an intimate personal relationship together. They started working together. That relationship dissolved. One of the partners is now remarried, but I've witnessed those two gentlemen battle it out brutally. And fortunately for them, they have guardrails in place, because if they didn't, you could see how things can go south pretty quickly when people fight over who has what type of authority, who owns what type of information, who's allowed to make certain types of decisions. Have you ever seen like a big loss, Bill? I'm sure you have.
I mean, I have, yes. I've seen basically families torn apart. You know,
Yeah. And I think it's always gut-wrenching for us as professionals to go back with the kind of, well, I told you so story, right? Like you just kind of,
Yeah.
and it's hard to do the cleanup, and your heart breaks for them. And people have a lot to lose. It's almost like they don't want to believe that something negative could potentially happen. And
Right.
it's sad to see. Okay. So you guys are a tough crowd. All right, so we're going to move on to beyond the non-compete, right? This is like the most common provision. It's not my favorite. It's rare that we ever recommend it. It's only one of the tools in a toolbox of many available provisions. There's other things that I really love. I love non-solicitations. I love confidentiality agreements. I love non-disclosures. And one of my favorite tools is a provision that allows me to contact the next employer. Because then if you believe someone is taking data with them, all you have to do is send a letter to the president of their new company. And the employee's already given you the consent to do that. So let's kind of dig into each of these. We know non-competes are becoming harder and harder to enforce, but with all the interactions that I have with different types of attorneys, labor attorneys, corporate attorneys, attorneys like yourselves, intellectual property, non-solicitation of clients is highly enforceable. And if you really think about this, every employee from reception, right? The people that allow customers in, maybe are taking IDs and sign-ins, all the way up to high-level executives. A non-solicitation of clients or customers is absolutely, it's a beautiful thing to have. And you should have it. I would think it would be rare that there would be a business where this would not be a helpful provision. Then you have non-solicitation of other employees, right? And most employees don't even think about this. They think, I have a great new job and there's a referral bonus. And if I tell Bob about my new job, I'm going to get $1,500 after 90 days. It's an easy way for me to make money, and I really want Bob to come and work with me. So they pick up the phone or they send an email or a text. And now you've got maybe 2 or 3 people. So you had one person that the competition stole away, and now they're walking away with several more. And there's not a lot that you can do if you don't have a non-solicitation of employees built in. Confidentiality and trade secret protection. So I recently met with a brand new client, professional engineering firm, certified veteran disabled business. Been around for 6 years, fast growing, no, no language at all about what's confidential and what's a trade secret. And so they're creating blueprints and drawings and doing construction management. They have a lot of proprietary systems and processes that they use. Also, I'm sure you all know pricing strategies, right? How do we price? What are our internal methodologies? What are our workflows? So that gets you into that proprietary information, competitive intelligence. Who does that belong to, and can employees use it? So this is really the full toolkit. And what I mentioned to you before, there's a couple other provisions that I like to see. Especially employees signing off on they're fine with the next employer understanding their obligations under their current restrictive covenant agreement. So that if you do lose someone to a competitor, or to someone who your client data or information would be helpful to, you can send directly to that employer what the employee's obligations are. So, we kind of touched on this, and I'm really great at talking past my own slides on occasion. But also because all of those provisions are highly enforceable, right? All these other provisions hold up in court. And New York State even has, you know, information like a duty of loyalty clause, where they firmly believe that if a company has taken steps to protect their information and their data, that that data is significant to them. And putting in these types of provisions and agreements is the company taking another step to demonstrate this is critical information for us. This is highly valued and protected. The same as putting a password on a CRM, or the same as preventing employees from downloading big pieces of data. These agreements serve a very similar type of protection, and oftentimes much more easily enforced than a non-compete agreement can be enforced with an employee. So we kind of talked about this typical missteps. You know, I asked ChatGPT to make it. I found it online. I got it from another business owner of friend. And there's references in that agreement that have nothing to do with that client's business. Or maybe they should have an intellectual property clause and they don't. And that gives them a sense of, you know, they're leaving blind spots and holes open in what they're able to do. So what's the better path, the smarter approach? We want to match the covenant to the risk that we're trying to protect from, and we want to use layered protections. So putting multiple covenants in the same agreement, they can still be fairly simple, you know, 4 to 5 page agreements. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. Um, in in the position that we sit in as human resource professionals, when you send this type of an agreement with an offer letter, there's usually 0 to no pushback. And we include language in our offer letters that say this offer is contingent upon your execution of this agreement, just like it would say contingent upon your eligibility to be employed in the United States or the results of a background check, right? So working with HR kind of layers in these procedures and processes, and then keeping agreements current. So I have a client that recently came back to us. We did some work with them probably back in 2011 to 2015. They made a lot of changes internally in the size of the organization, came back to us in February of this year, literally had the same 3-phrase confidentiality agreement that they started out with in 2004. And now dealing with thousands and thousands of students, a much larger employee population. They're in a hybrid work environment. A lot of employees work 100% remote. And so they had general counsel. One of the things I said to the general counsel is, we're updating your onboarding. Let's update this agreement at the same time and figure out, we're going to add this into the new hire documents. And then as we update your handbook, we'll roll this out as a separate addendum. Because when you roll things out together, employees kind of expect it. You're professionalizing, you're updating. It's not that challenging to get companies to be in a current place. So here's one of the sad stories, and I'm sure you can all relate to one of these. But in technology startups, right, you've got developers, you've got coders, you've got a lot of IT people. They write proprietary code, and this particular client only had a non-compete. So when the employee left, they took a lot of the code and the language with them. And in trying to enforce the non-compete, the court ruled that you were prohibiting the employee from working in an industry that was so aligned with their training and experience that it was an undue hardship. They would not enforce the non-compete. And really, what the client really needed was a confidentiality agreement and an intellectual property agreement, which would have been much easier to enforce. And so you know, again, lesson learned in this particular situation. But that's kind of what happens. And I think we see a lot in the tech space where that goes on. So, all right, I'm going to ask you guys to participate again. I know maybe I'm a sucker for punishment here, but do you have clients right now that are literally just thinking that non-compete is going to do it, and they're overlooking other types of restrictive covenants where maybe they would be better served? Is anybody willing to chime in? Does
I,
anybody? Oh, I heard a voice.
Bill, I have a person who got laid off, has non-compete. Does that non-compete need to line up with the timeframes of the other restrictive covenants? So like you can't do the same job for 12 months, but we're only going to pay you for 6 months of severance. And it like is there a relationship that has to be managed there, or is that I'm off topic?
No, I think you raise a really good point. So if you really want it to be enforceable, and you literally laid the employee off, the court is going to look at it and say, are you creating an undue hardship for this person to be able to be gainfully employed based on the industry that they have experience in and the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they've invested training in? So if you're going to try to prevent them from competing for 12 months, the likelihood is you might as well just pay them for the 12 months, included in a separation agreement, right? And I would even space out the payments. So sometimes what we see clients do is they want to give people lump sums, right? And if you give someone a lump sum, it's very hard to pull that back. So we often suggest, for cash flow reasons and also for enforceability, if you're paying someone over time and they violate the agreement, you can stop the payments. So you have some teeth, and it really um the employee that's getting those separation payments understands it better. They understand their obligations, and they're much less likely to do it because, I mean, going to court or trying to get an injunction or writing letters to opposing counsel starts to get really expensive and time consuming. And in the middle of it, you're losing critical information. So I think you raise a really good issue that if you want a non-compete to be enforceable for 12 months and the company's the one that laid the person off, the reality is you might as well give them 12 months of severance because you've created this conflict for yourself. Now, usually with a non-solicitation, you could have a non-solicitation, and sometimes it's easier to push the envelope on a non-solicitation, right? So maybe it could be 24 months or 36 months that they can't take an employee with them because that's really not an undue hardship on the employee who's trying to get another job. So we can push the terms out and allow the employee to believe that's absolutely enforceable. And I would think in most situations, I mean, we see 24 months being enforced all the time in a non-solicitation. So again, being a business owner myself, I did have a client that really wanted to hire one of my HR business partners. They loved her. And I said, well, great. And because there was a 24-month non-solicitation in her agreement and in theirs, I was able to negotiate with that client. You have to pay me to replace her. and I need a certain amount of payment to train my new person to get up to speed. And you have to give me some time and a runway to be able to do it, right? Because a lot of us will be super flexible when we're trying to work with clients or support clients, but we also don't want to lose in the end. So on the other parts of the agreement, you definitely, I've seen that extended 24 months. If you really want to push the envelope, you could shoot for 36, in a non-solicitation of customer information, and employees. So, all right, I am going to move on. And Bill, I really appreciate you holding it together with me here. So, you know, people that don't have these agreements, there's a big, huge hole in the safety net. It's kind of like, let's just open the window and let money go. And you can lose an entire team of people overnight. So one of the tragic things that I've seen go wrong is with one of my colleagues who, serious marketing agency, very successful. She had a partner. She was diagnosed with cancer and she's battling cancer, and it's been an ongoing battle. And in the middle of the battle with cancer, the partner decides that she's not carrying her weight. And so, in kind of a backdoor way, tries to take a good portion of the team and half of the clients and just walk out. And tries to convince the clients that she's so sick, she can't operate the business. So it's unfortunate, but if you have a client that could potentially be in a position of weakness, um, facing an illness, I think it's even more important that they understand what just happened? How do you protect? I think I clicked where I shouldn't have clicked. How do you protect that person? So going back to Bill's question, you know, I'm just throwing a number out there, but is the $2,500 or the $5,000 I'm going to spend on this agreement going to pay off? Well, absolutely it will, because typically if you're using an at-will agreement, you can use that across your entire employee population. You might want to have something a little bit more robust at the executive level. But if you have 15 people, 20 people, 100 people, that agreement is going to be applicable across the entire population, enforceable, relevant. And again, we don't see a lot of pushback on people getting them to sign, right? So, I mean, we've covered this. The cost is more than money. If your customer list goes out the door with one of your salespeople, that's a little embarrassing. And now you've got to explain to your customers how their data is just not protected. And that's not a nice conversation to have. And business operation is tremendously expensive. Okay. So what do people do wrong? I think we've kind of covered this. They're using old agreements and they're not reinforcing the processes in employee offboarding. So I have seen companies, do a significant reduction in force, and in the separation agreement, not include any type of restrictive covenant, which is kind of a miss on the attorney's part. So sometimes, as professionals, we all have to work together to say, look, you're letting go of 25 people who you don't need right now, or you're in an economic downturn. But if you're going to give them a severance benefit, let's get something in exchange for it beyond just you're not going to sue us, right? Or wage and hour litigation. So get those clauses put in there, and the people that were let go were given 90 days of pay. So there was definitely enough consideration that those types of provisions should have been in a separation agreement. Okay, so we talked about this. What do we do instead? Right, tailor it, regular updates, don't use something that's 10 years old, and constantly strengthen the process. So when you're onboarding employees, when you're offboarding employees, those are the points where it makes a lot of sense to get agreements signed, to confirm that agreements are signed, and also provide the employee a copy of what they signed. Because if you want them to understand their obligations, logic sort of dictates that the employee needs to receive a copy of what they agreed to in that restrictive covenant, particularly upon termination. If they signed it 2 or 3 years ago, they really don't remember it. So a lot of times as HR professionals, we recommend referencing that agreement in their termination letter, and then also providing them with a copy of what they signed, so that we're reminding them of all their obligations that survive the employment relationship. Okay.
You ever ask someone to you give them a copy of the agreement that they've already signed, like let's say years before, and just sign a letter acknowledging that they signed that document, that they understand the document?
I don't think we've actually ever done that. Typically, what we do is New York State requires that all terminated employees get a letter that outlines the last day of work, the last day they're paid through, when their benefits end, if there's any payout of vacation or sick time. And in that letter, we reference the enclosed agreement that they
Okay.
signed, and we include a copy, and then we send it with a certificate of mailing so that we have proof. And that seems to hold up. Sometimes, unless you're giving employees money upon their departure, it can be a little bit of a wrangle to get them to sign something else, especially if they're let go for misconduct, for cause, for a violation of company policy. So if you're going to give a separation agreement, it's a great time to make sure that all of those provisions are really up to snuff and current. Because people get a little, I think cranky might be the word.
Mhm.
And rightfully so. You just, you maybe lost a job that you thought you were going to have.
Right.
Okay. So I'm going to keep going because you're not a chatty crowd. So we're not reflecting anymore. I will go to the end. Um, so what's the ideal relationship to really make this work seamlessly? And, there's a couple things. One, strong legal agreements with an attorney that really understands the business. And a lot of times that is a good time to partner with HR. HR understands the different jobs, the different job roles, how the organization, the reporting relationships, who's a key employee, who's not. They can give a lot of insight into um, how do people get in trouble, and how do we implement it? How do we make it part of the onboarding process? How do we make it part of the offboarding process? If we want to give agreements to current employees, maybe where none have existed before, it's often a good opportunity to do that when there's a merit increase or a promotion that, you're giving them consideration at that time. And then the constant monitoring. If people aren't monitoring that all employees have signed these agreements or doing some type of a periodic self-audit, to make sure that the agreements are still in place, then as outside counsel, you might lose that line of sight to even know, is your client actually protected? And issuing these agreements via electronic systems. So most people at this point in time have some type of an HRIS where you can get an electronic signature, easily issue agreements at onboarding while people are employed or upon offboarding, and then maintain them all electronically in a secure environment where you can easily audit and review, are they in place? So what I like to see is legal and human resource people become partners in understanding the legal protection and the provision is really only as strong as the implementation and the practice in place to make sure that it actually happens. So I think we've touched on before, sometimes these agreements sit in drawers or sit in people's emails, and leadership doesn't know how to communicate them. HR is very good at communication, implementation, and making sure that things are rolled out and communicated at effective times when they can be enforceable and signed off on. Sometimes attorneys and HR work in different silos, and that's really not a great relationship to have, because then both parties can be blind to different things. So we're in a situation right now with a client where in the end of December, this client told us that they were having employees sign an arbitration agreement. And every year in New York, basically minimum wage goes up. So this year it went up again. The salary basis test goes up. And a couple of the employees that qualified to be exempt from overtime after January 1st did not. They weren't paid a minimum salary based on New York standards. And so, in the process of correcting that, one of the employees challenged that he should always have been classified as an hourly employee. So, when we went back to look at this arbitration agreement that an attorney had rolled out, it referenced release and waiver to wage and hour claims, but it also didn't have a specific date. So now we need to kind of backtrack and get with this attorney to see, is this protective of this wage and hour allegation that the employee has made? And is the agreement effective the date that he signed it? Because it doesn't have an effective date, which so for me is a little bit unusual. Most agreements have an effective date or clearly state this agreement becomes effective on the date that it's signed, not just a reference to December of 2024. So that's where if we have to enforce things blindly or we don't know what's in place, we don't know when to pull triggers, we don't know when to alert management, and 99% of the time, companies don't really even know all the provisions in their employee handbook. And so making sure that HR is up to speed with all these agreements and supporting the enforceability is super critical. So this is a situation where we did work collaboratively. One of our educational institutions, they were going through a leadership transition. They faced the president changed, the head of admissions changed, significant opportunities here for loss of student data and for key leaders to leave. The confidentiality agreement was from 2004, so 3 paragraphs, not long. We worked with their general counsel to make sure that before these changes were made, we had strong agreements in place and implemented an onboarding and offboarding programs. Okay, so we're kind of running out of time. We have 7 minutes. I'm not sure that anybody wants to speak at this point. So I'm going to kind of go through and kind of get to my ending in case there's questions and do a recap. So what did we cover, right? What are all the myths and misconceptions? What are all the provisions that go beyond the non-compete? What are the dramatic losses that can be suffered by businesses? And oftentimes, again, more damaging to smaller companies because it puts them in a place of inability to compete. And then how do attorneys partner with human resource professionals to make that effective? You as attorneys face that clients are often blind to the risk. You know that the non-compete is not alone. You also know that nothing that sits in a drawer is enforceable. And the phone rings when the damage is already done. And there's not a lot that you can do except potentially threaten litigation. Again, expensive, time consuming, and you might not even get the result you want. So if these things don't change, clients will continue to lose data. face potentially reputational damage and potentially strained client relationships. So if we could have a better vision of what is a better way to do this, where clients feel protected, agreements are practical, attorneys are viewed as proactive and forward-thinking visionaries, that's really the ideal place to be. And so that's why I always suggest that you partner with an HR professional in rolling these things out. If you don't have HR on team with a client, I welcome the opportunity to connect with you and talk about how we could partner. If you want to schedule a 15-minute call with me to learn more about what we do at Compass, you can scan the QR code. That's a link directly to my calendar. And I also put my email and phone number here if you ever come up against other types of HR related questions, overtime, minimum wage, exempt versus non-exempt. I've been in the field for quite a while and really seen everything from homeless employees that need a little help to clients that have had homicides um, at the workplace. So vast amount of experience. There's 10 of us on the team, and we're more than happy to be of service to all of you if we can in any way. So thank you so much.
All
So
right.
I will stop sharing. I can send this over in a PDF if that would be helpful. And maybe, I don't know, Bill, does anyone have any questions? I don't see, there's nothing in the chat. This is really an extraordinarily quiet group of people.
Anybody have an opinion?
I feel like Bueller, is anyone there?
Let's say you're in a situation, are you, so let's say like the non-compete, there's all different types of enforceability, depending on state by state. Um, do you keep track of that? Like the status of
Well, it's like a moving
where
target.
Wyoming is, kind of.
Yeah, like we have tools and resources where we can look it up. I mean, and there's some states where the basic answer is not a good idea, like California, just not a good idea, right? Like I think we all know that. But it's literally like a chessboard of multiple colors when it comes to different states and what they're going to allow you to do. And even surprisingly, some states like Iowa, I have a colleague in Iowa who runs a nurse staffing business, and Iowa's seems to be extremely unfriendly to a non-compete, and her people get stolen all the time. So I've encouraged her to really get with a good IP attorney and figure out what about the other provisions, the non-solicitation, the confidentiality? Can she leverage these things to protect herself? Because it's a huge point of pain.
So, anyone else have any thoughts or questions? Face any issues in this space? Well, here we've got a question in the chat. How do you balance between keeping your client, the company's interests, intact when HR has its own opinions in what the individual employee's contract and its terms should entail?
Well, I think it goes back to that collaboration. And HR really needs to be on board with protecting the organization. I mean, we're supposed to be people friendly, but you're there to protect the company, right? You're there to support the guardrails. So I think it's about educating the HR professionals about why do we need these provisions? What are we looking to protect and what can go wrong? And I think a lot of times they're probably uncomfortable explaining the agreement to the employee. So maybe even giving them some verbiage to explain what do these 3 paragraphs mean and how do you explain confidential information or a non-solicitation clause. And kind of, I think I alluded to it, explaining to the employee that this protects your job. This protects the company information. This allows the work environment to be more stable, for you to be more secure, and for us to have business continuity, just like you have backup for your server system, right? You have backup for your information and your data.
Anyone else have any, thanks, Jason. Anything else they might want to share in the chat? Well, Christine, this was really great. I learned a lot. It has a lot of applicability to a couple cases I'm working on right now. And I will keep you in the loop. And wanted to thank everybody for joining us for the coffee hour. And just a reminder, every month we have an expert come and speak on a topic that's related to issues that influence our intellectual property practice and doing business. Christine's going to send us a PDF of the presentation, and you'll all have her contact information so that you can reach out with the questions that I'm guessing you do have. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Sharman. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Christine and Bill. This concludes today's coffee hour. Christine, thank you for your time and insight today. And to our guests, thank you for choosing New York State Bar Association programs. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.